Caio and Bruna seemed destined for each other. Young, intense, passionate, and poor, like so many other couples who had everything to go wrong, yet believed with all their strength that it could go right. He, a simple boy, son of a bricklayer, worked as a helper loading and unloading goods at the small neighborhood market. His strong, sweaty body was a showcase of daily labor, and even amid hardship, it was impossible not to notice the beauty that emanated from every rough gesture, from every tired smile at the end of a long shift. Bruna was the girl with big eyes, ambitious ideas, and a restless mouth. Born in the same neighborhood, raised by her grandmother, and dreaming far too high for the world around her. When they fell in love, it felt like time stopped in those exchanged glances between the bus stop and the Sunday nights, where they shared a pastry and a Coke in a poorly lit square. But there was something in Bruna that no one ever fully understood. A bitter silence hiding between her dreams, a rush to win, to escape, to conquer. She was intense like fire, but as unstable as the wind. And just like that, on an ordinary day, with no explanation, no argument, no goodbye, she vanished from Caio's life. A note left between his clothes said only, "Don't look for me. I need this." And the "this" was never explained. Caio waited, for days, for weeks. He even knocked on her grandmother's door, but the old woman cried and said that Bruna had gone to chase the future and hadn't been heard from. The future, that word cut like a knife into living flesh, because to him, the future was her, and now there was only absence, an empty void left by the woman who had sworn eternal love and suddenly abandoned him with torn promises and a shattered heart. Years went by. Caio buried Bruna somewhere deep in the darkest corner of his soul and moved on. He helped his father rebuild the family workshop, faced debts, crises, and even the threat of losing what little was left of their small business. Every callus on his hands was a reminder of how unforgiving the world is to those born poor. But even as time charged its price, Caio never lost his dignity. He never sold out, never stopped caring for his sick father, never stopped smiling at the neighbors. And it was in this harsh landscape that a new light appeared. Livia, the young woman who sold homemade meals in the next neighborhood, with a shy smile, a soft voice, and eyes that said everything without ever needing to raise their tone. She was not rich, nor did she have any ambitions to change the world, but she was steadfast, loyal, and saw in Caio a man of true worth, something rare in a time full of appearances and empty promises. As time passed, Livia and Caio built something they themselves could barely name. A calm love, without fireworks, but with deep roots. They shared bills, modest dreams, and nights clinging to each other on a worn-out mattress in the small back house. And even with financial struggles tightening around their necks, they stood firm together. Caio finally felt that the past had stayed where it belonged, buried, until one sultry late afternoon, with the smell of rain on the horizon, the noise of a luxury car breaking the silence of the neighborhood, announced that nothing would stay in its place for long. Bruna was back, and now she was a millionaire. Time had turned Caio into more than just a survivor. He had become an almost mythical figure among the women in the neighborhood, tall, with a body sculpted through effort, a serious gaze that hid secrets, and a silent way of making everything seem possible. He was the kind of man who didn't need to speak much to be noticed. It was enough to walk through the street market with a tight shirt clinging to his sweat, or show up at the garage with grease on his arms and a stack of bills in his pocket. The young women whispered, the married ones watched discreetly, and even the older ones sighed quietly. But he didn't give anyone a chance. Caio's heart already had an owner, and her name was Livia. Livia was the opposite of the women who desired Caio out of vanity. She was delicate without being weak, beautiful without effort, and possessed a rare soul. She earned her living selling homemade lunches, waking up at 5 in the morning to cook, delivering them by bicycle, and still caring for her sick grandmother as if the whole world depended on the kindness that lived inside her. When she met Caio, she didn't see the muscles or the reputation of the handsome man from the neighborhood. She saw the fatigue in his eyes, the pain in his back, and a will to keep going even when everything seemed lost. That was why she approached him. And for the first time since Bruna's abandonment, Caio felt that he didn't need to protect himself so much anymore. Little by little, Like watering a forgotten plant, Livia brought life back to that scarred heart. They started with very little: a shared lunch during her delivery break, a shy conversation in front of the workshop, a note left inside one of the meals that read, "You are not alone," written by hand. Before he realized it, he no longer knew how to live without that simple smile, without that gentle presence that arrived quietly, but filled everything. And she also fell in love, with every gesture, with every silence, with every time he wiped his hands clean before touching her face, as if she were made of glass. Even without money, without luxury, without anything beyond the essentials, they built a solid love. They rented a small shed in the back of the neighborhood, where they slept hugging each other on a mattress on the floor and dreamed about what the world could still offer. Despite the overdue bills, the workshop on the verge of collapse, and the refrigerator that was always empty, there was hope there. And it was this hope that made Caio refuse offers of easy ways out, that made him turn away from the constant flirtations of women who appeared offering comfort in exchange for company. He belonged to Livia, and only to her. So much so that, even with financial chaos, he decided to ask for her hand in marriage. A simple ring, bought in 10 installments on credit, became the symbol of a love that didn't need ostentation to exist. She cried. He cried too. They promised to fight together, build together, win together. What they didn't know was that the past wasn't dead. It was just waiting for the right moment to open the door and charge dearly for everything left behind. Because on the very day they went together to receive the rejection of a loan request that could have saved the workshop, a black luxury car parked across the street, and from inside it stepped out a woman dressed in red, wearing dark sunglasses, stiletto heels, and a smile that made memories hurt. Bruna had come back, richer than anyone in the city, more beautiful than Caio could even remember, and with a look that left no doubt. She hadn't come back to visit the neighborhood. She had come back to take back what she claimed was hers. The deep rumble of the engine tore through the silence of the dirt road like a misplaced thunderclap. The children playing with spinning tops and flip-flops stopped. The old men sitting on the sidewalk frowned. And Caio, when he saw the black car gleaming under the scorching afternoon sun, felt a chill run down his spine, as if something ancient was about to be resurrected. It was a luxury model that no one there had ever seen up close. Wide tires, dark tinted windows, flawless paint, the kind of car even the city hall wouldn't dare to own. The door opened slowly, revealing a thin stiletto heel touching the cracked ground of the neighborhood as if stepping on marble. Then came tanned legs, a tight skirt, a designer bag, and finally, her, Bruna. It was impossible to recognize her at first glance. So different was she from the girl with her hair pinned back with a clip and torn jeans he had met years before. Now, Bruna wore her hair down, wavy, perfectly dyed. Golden-framed sunglasses hid the eyes that once begged for promises. Her skin glowed with professional makeup. Her red lips curved into a victorious smile, and every step screamed confidence, money, and control. She stopped in front of the workshop where Caio was finishing tuning the engine of an old car. And when she removed her glasses, it was as if his life went off balance for 2 eternal seconds. "Hi, Caio. Did you miss me?" The voice was the same, only firmer now, sharper, like someone who learned to hurt without needing to raise their tone. He froze. His grease-covered hands trembled. Livia, in the background, stepped out carrying a bag of lunchboxes, but froze mid-step when she saw that woman standing there, her gaze fixed on the man who was now her fiancé. Bruna looked Livia up and down with thinly veiled disdain, as if inspecting a stain on the wall. She smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. It was a warning. Then she turned back to Caio and, without hesitation, dropped the bomb that would change everything. "I need to talk to you. Alone. It's important." Caio hesitated, but Bruna didn't wait. She walked back to the car and, with a gesture, signaled for him to get in. Like someone hypnotizing prey with power and shine, she knew exactly what she was doing. Livia tried to hide her discomfort, but her eyes betrayed the fear that had just been born, the fear that the past, even buried, still had the strength to destroy the present. Caio took a deep breath, wiped his hands on a dirty rag, and got into the car. The silence between them was tense, heavy with questions. And as the car slid through the narrow streets of the city toward a luxury restaurant in the high part of town, Bruna just smiled, like someone holding a fatal trump card. In the restaurant, everything exuded wealth, heavy silverware, waiters wearing gloves, a menu in French. Caio felt like an intruder in that world, with his simple shirt and the smell of oil still clinging to his skin. But Bruna was at home. She seemed to have been born there. She ordered an absurdly expensive wine, spoke of her new life, of the businesses she had opened, of the trips she had taken. Then, without taking her eyes off him, she fired, "I won the lottery, 120 million. I invested, tripled it. I own properties, stocks, power, and yes, I still think of you." Caio said nothing. His jaw locked, fists clenched. Bruna then leaned over the table, brought her lips close to his ear, and whispered, "I want you back, but not like before. Now it's on my terms. I'll save your father's business. I'll give whatever it takes. But you break up with that lunch seller and come back to me, or I'll make sure you both watch everything collapse." The proposal fell like a bomb. It wasn't just an attempt at reconciliation. It was blackmail. It was power thrown in his face with cruelty. Caio stood up, blood boiling, rage crushing his chest. But Bruna, unmoved, finished her wine as if savoring a victory that was already hers. "Think carefully, Caio. I'm offering you the world. It's all up to you." He walked out of there staggering. He didn't know what was worse, the indecency of the proposal or the fear that, to save his family, he might really have no choice. Caio went back home like someone carrying a bomb about to explode. His face was hardened, his chest heaving, and guilt throbbed like a freshly opened wound. Livia was there, sitting on the plastic chair on the porch, legs crossed and eyes fixed on the horizon. She didn't ask anything. She knew that when silence screams like that, it's because words can no longer handle the damage. Caio went in, washed his face, changed clothes, but he was still drenched in cold sweat. He tried to find a way to tell what had happened without breaking the fragile castle of trust that the two of them had built with so much sacrifice. Hours later, already at the table, with reheated rice and almost cold beans, he finally spoke, without flourishes, without detours. He told her everything, from Bruna's arrival to the dirty proposal made at the restaurant. He said he hadn't accepted it, but also didn't deny that he had been tempted. After all, the family business was on the brink of bankruptcy, his father was getting sicker, and the bills kept piling up like dust on a dry day. With every word spoken, Livia's face closed off, like someone watching a nightmare in slow motion. When he finished, she didn't scream. She simply put the cutlery on the plate, stood up slowly and said, her voice shaking, "If you're thinking about accepting, just tell me, because I won't stay to watch." And then she went to the bedroom, closed the door, and for hours the only sound was the muffled crying trying to be hidden behind the thin wall. Caio slept on the sofa, sleepless, restless, groundless. The next day, Livia was no longer there. She had disappeared before sunrise, taking only a backpack and leaving the engagement ring on the kitchen table. No note, no warning, just absence. The days that followed were torment. Caio tried to call, looked for her along her delivery routes, asked neighbors, but no one knew anything. Meanwhile, Bruna kept showing up more and more. She sent messages, gifts, even flowers to the workshop, as if she could buy affection with expensive perfume and rehearsed words. Caio resisted, but every time the electricity bill came, every time his father coughed blood into a dirty rag, every time the workshop lost another client, that damned proposal echoed louder and louder in his head, until, one day, in absolute despair, with the employees leaving and the bank threatening to seize the machines, Caio collapsed. He cried hidden inside the car, punched the steering wheel until his hands bled, and then made the call he had sworn never to make. He answered with a hoarse voice, "Bruna, is the offer still standing?" On the other end, her smile was almost tangible. "It always has been." That night, he went to her apartment, a luxurious duplex with a view over the city, the smell of lavender, and furniture that looked more like works of art. She greeted him in a tight black dress, a glass of wine in her hand, and a victorious glint in her eyes. Caio was broken inside. There was no desire, only exhaustion. And it was in that atmosphere of defeat and resignation that he accepted the conditions she had imposed. But before, with a voice torn between pain and wounded pride, he made a demand. If I'm going to sell my soul, then I want one thing in return. I want you to come with me to the workshop. I want you to look into my father's eyes and tell him you're going to save the business, that he won't die bankrupt. You want to have me, then face head-on what's left of my dignity. Bruna hesitated for a second, but then she smiled. She knew she had won. And when a woman believes she already controls all the pieces on the board, it's because she doesn't imagine that the checkmate is still to come. The days that followed felt like living inside a waking nightmare. Caio, now trapped in a web of forced decisions, felt his dignity slipping through his fingers like warm grease from a worn-out engine. He had given in, yes, not out of weakness, but out of sheer desperation. For his father's workshop, for the debts that grew like a plague, for the fear of seeing the last piece of his family's legacy collapse under the rubble of poverty. Bruna, triumphant, did exactly what he demanded. She went to the workshop, stepped out in stiletto heels, wearing an expensive leather coat as if she were attending a fashion show, and shook his father's trembling hand with a false kindness that curled at the corners of her mouth. She said she would make an investment, that she would save the business in exchange for a renewed emotional partnership with Caio. The old man, sick and tired, barely understood what that meant. He just gave thanks, his eyes wet, believing his son was finally receiving a blessing from life. He had no idea it was a trap. In the neighborhood, the news spread like wildfire. Gossip spared no one. They said Caio had sold himself, that he had left his lunch seller fiancée for a rich woman, that he was just another man weak before the shine of money. The looks that once admired him now carried contempt and judgment. Even his old colleagues from the workshop began avoiding conversation. Caio tried to convince himself that this was temporary, that he was doing the right thing for his family. But the truth was that with every day beside Bruna, he sank deeper into shame. She treated everything like a game. She posted photos of the two of them at expensive dinners, made a point of walking hand in hand with him in luxury malls, and constantly teased, "Don't you miss the old times? Now you finally have the life you deserve." But there was no life there, only appearances. Caio slept in a guest room, refused any touch from her, and spent sleepless nights staring at the ceiling, asking himself when he had lost who he was. And meanwhile, Livia remained missing. He searched through social media, sent messages, went to her grandmother's house, but no one knew where she was. It was as if she had vanished from the world, and that silence hurt more than any word could. It was the invisible punishment that accompanied him every morning. The only thing keeping him standing was the workshop. Bruna's injection of money had indeed rebuilt the business. The bills were paid, the machines repaired, and old customers started coming back. His father, even sick, regained some of the sparkle in his eyes when he saw the engines working again. And Caio clung to that, like a castaway clings to a piece of wood, as if saving the family legacy could be enough to justify the emotional wreckage he faced inside. But the heart cannot be fooled for long, and the body began to collect its toll. Insomnia, nausea, anxiety attacks, loss of appetite. It was as if he was slowly being corroded by a life that didn't belong to him. Bruna, on the other hand, seemed more and more comfortable with this reconciliation. She began talking about marriage, about children, about international trips. But Caio remained cold, absent, distant, until, one night at a business party full of influential entrepreneurs, she introduced him as "my future husband," and he froze. He didn't reply, didn't smile, just walked away and left without looking back. That night, drunk and desperate, he got into the car and drove aimlessly, shouting alone inside the vehicle, punching the steering wheel until he stopped in front of the square where, years earlier, he used to share a pastry and a soda with Bruna, when everything was real, when there was still love. It was there, sitting on the cold, dirty cement bench, wet from drizzle, that he finally understood. Resisting was no longer enough. He was about to lose everything, not just the woman he loved, but also himself. And in that instant, he swore that he would find Livia, even if he had to turn the world upside down, even if it was too late. Livia was hiding in the only place Caio would never think to look, the neighboring city, in the house of a distant cousin who owed her old favors. She had taken with her nothing but a worn-out backpack, a few clothes, the recipe notebook for her homemade meals, and what little dignity remained after what she considered the greatest humiliation of her life. For weeks, she avoided any mention of her old neighborhood, blocked every social media account, ignored messages, refused calls. Her body still ached, not from blows, but from abandonment. She wasn't naive. She knew that the money of Caio's ex-girlfriend was a weapon, and she also knew that a man under pressure can make mistakes. But watching the man she loved get into that woman's car without even looking back, that was a blow no words could heal. And so she ran away, not to hide, but to keep from imploding. She started selling lunchboxes in another neighborhood, silent, with the same professional smile, but without any spark in her eyes. The nights were long, the days even heavier. The pain came in waves, sometimes tears in the bathroom, sometimes sobs in the middle of the street, sometimes an emptiness so vast that even tears could not fill it. But even wounded, Livia did not hate Caio, and that was what hurt the most. She still loved him. She still remembered his tight hugs, the nights spent in silence with her head resting on his chest, the bad jokes, the way he would fix the collar of her blouse before she left. It was too much love to be erased by betrayal, but it was also too much dignity to accept being the second choice. Meanwhile, back in the original city, Caio was silently losing his mind. He hired a private detective, searched for clues, called every contact he could, but Livia was off the map. No one knew where she lived, where she sold, where she walked. Each day without news was like another brick on the tomb of the love he had buried with his own hands. Bruna's presence became more and more suffocating. She controlled his schedule, the bank accounts, the social events. Caio felt like a luxury prisoner, well-dressed, surrounded by comfort, but chained inside. On one of the greyest days of that emotional hell, Bruna came up with an idea, a trip abroad. She said it would be a new beginning, an early honeymoon, a way to turn the page. He refused, firmly. For the first time, he raised his voice. He said he would not marry her, that he no longer loved her, that he would never love Bruna again. She laughed with disdain, said that he was confused, too ungrateful to admit the truth, but he did not back down. And in that moment, something changed in her eyes. What had been charm turned to coldness. What had been conquest turned to threat. And that was when Bruna made her biggest mistake. If you think you're going back to that poor girl, forget it. I can destroy everything. The workshop, your reputation, your family. I made you rise. And if I want, I'll drag you down again. Caio didn't answer. He just grabbed the keys, walked out the door, and left. That night, he slept on the floor of the workshop, among rusty parts and the smell of oil. He cried like a child, curled up, alone, and decided that no matter the cost, he would find Livia and win back the woman he should never have lost. Before breaking things off with Bruna for good, Caio tried one last move. He returned to her apartment, the same place where so many silences screamed louder than any words, and with red eyes and a shattered soul, took the wine glass from her hand, threw it away with a single motion and said, "I'll stay with you, but on one condition." Oh. Bruna, sitting on the sofa with her legs crossed, raised an eyebrow in fake surprise. She knew he would come back. She was convinced that Caio was now nothing more than a puppet dangling on the strings of despair. But what he said next wiped the smile right off her face. "I want you to help me find Livia. I want her to see with her own eyes what I've become. I want her to hear from your mouth that you've won, that you destroyed what we had. You want to have me? Then prove you're not afraid of her." Bruna stayed silent for a few seconds. The request was unusual, even humiliating, but she was too proud to show discomfort. She gave a short, venomous laugh and replied, "You want to use me as an excuse to bury that past? Fine, we'll go after your ex. But after this, Caio, you will forget that name. You'll rip that woman out of your life like you pull out a weed." They left the same day. The private detective Caio had hired had finally managed to find a lead, and Bruna, now joining in as an accomplice, insisted on using her resources to speed everything up. She wanted to watch her rival's emotional collapse. She wanted to see her broken, to feel avenged. Livia had been found at a small street market in the neighboring city, selling lunchboxes near a public school. Caio recognized her movements from afar, the dirty apron, the hair pinned back with improvised clips, and that smile disguised as normalcy, the same smile that had saved him so many times from the abyss. He felt his heart collapse in his chest, his eyes burn, and his knees almost give way. Bruna got out of the car before him. She went ahead. Livia had her back turned, handing a lunchbox to a teacher. When she turned around and came face to face with the woman who had destroyed her life, the expression of surprise mixed with restrained disgust. Bruna, with an air of superiority, simply smiled and said in a mocking tone, "I came to thank you. Thanks to you, he's with me." Livia stayed silent, firm, like someone facing a predator without showing fear. Only after a few seconds did she reply, "You may have his body, but his soul, never." And then Caio appeared, trembling, vulnerable, broken. He knelt down on the sidewalk, among crumbs of savory pastries and the smell of frying oil. He cried, he begged, that he did everything wrong, that he sold his own soul out of fear of losing the only thing that gave meaning to his life, her. Livia, for a moment, didn't know what to do. The whole world was watching. Bruna stared at the scene with growing fury. And then the bomb went off. Livia took off her apron, threw it on the ground and said, "If you want to fix what you destroyed, you'll have to start from zero. Without your rich lover's money, without games, without pride. Prove to me you are still the man who used to eat pastries with me on that park bench." And she turned her back. She walked away. She didn't cry. She didn't shout. She just left him there, kneeling before his own ruin. And Bruna couldn't handle it. She lost control. She screamed at him. She punched the car. She tore her dress. She called him trash, said he was ungrateful, miserable, a stray dog. And in that moment, Caio saw the truth. She had never loved him. She never wanted love. She only wanted to win, to have the trophy. And now that he refused to be owned, she revealed the fangs of the true beast she had hidden behind her jewels. Caio returned to the city alone. He restarted at the workshop, sold part of the equipment to pay off what he could, refused financial help, decided to rebuild with his own hands, and he kept Livia's apron as a reminder of what he needed to win back, not with promises, but with actions. He didn't want pity. He wanted to deserve her again. Bruna had never been just ambitious. She was strategic, silent, cold, and above all, carried inside her a wound no one knew about. For years, the story she told everyone was that she had left Caio out of necessity, out of lack of prospects, out of the desire to grow. But the truth, locked away as if under 7 keys, was far filthier. Bruna had stolen money from her own grandmother. It wasn't much, but it was enough to flee the neighborhood and try her luck with illegal betting, underground games, and morally dubious financial speculation circles. It was in that underworld that she came across the winning lottery ticket, bought with the change from one of those shady schemes. The money that made her a millionaire and supposedly untouchable came from an old sin she never wanted anyone to find out. But the past, as always, never forgets. Bruna's grandmother, now old and ill, never spoke of the theft. Too protective, she preferred to swallow her disappointment rather than expose her granddaughter to public shame. But everything changed when a new caregiver was hired and began to notice that the old woman, in her sleep, murmured names, amounts, and dates. Curious, this woman, who, by coincidence, was a cousin of a former employee at Caio's workshop, recorded one of these nighttime ramblings and handed it over to the young man. Within days, the audio reached Caio, who immediately recognized the story being told. It was the explanation he had never had. It was the truth that destroyed the myth Bruna had built around her own disappearance. Driven by this revelation, Caio decided to confront her. He went to the luxurious office she kept in the city's financial district, knocked on the door without an appointment, and walked in without asking permission. She was on the phone negotiating a multi-million-dollar merger, but lost her smile as soon as she saw his eyes. Caio threw the phone onto the desk, with the audio already playing, and leaned against the wall. For 2 endless minutes, the voice of the grandmother filled the room. She took it from my medicine box, left saying she'd be back, never came back, until she got lucky with the big prize. Bruna turned pale. Her hands shook. She tried to deny it. She tried to say that her grandmother was senile, that it was a fabrication, manipulation, a lie. But Caio was no longer moved by her excuses. For the first time, he saw her for what she really was. Not a rejected and vengeful woman, but a spoiled child using money as a mask to hide the filth of her own soul. She lost control, screamed, threatened to sue, to destroy everything he had. But this time, he didn't give in. He simply said one sentence before leaving. "You bought everything, except the right to lie forever." In the days that followed, the audio spread. Quickly, local outlets began investigating the origin of Bruna's fortune. Complaints surfaced. People who had been involved in shady schemes began to talk. Investigations were opened. Lawyers were summoned. And the empire of appearances Bruna had built with so much pride began to collapse like a house of cards in a strong wind. Meanwhile, Caio buried himself in work. The workshop was standing, but fragile. Clients slowly returned, and he made a point of attending to each one personally, with humility and sweat. He no longer accepted help. He didn't look for Livia. He knew he wasn't ready yet. It was as if he were waiting for the right moment, the reunion that wouldn't be born of haste, but of real transformation. And that moment, though distant, seemed closer with every bolt tightened, with every engine repaired, with every new night of sleep, with a clean conscience. On the other side, Bruna faced the courts. She was exposed in the press, made headlines, lost contracts. The money began to drain away. Her bank account was no longer untouchable. Friends disappeared. Invitations stopped coming. And the woman who once promised the world in exchange for a yes now walked with her head down, trapped by the consequences of her own lie. And for the first time, Caio felt that there was justice in the world. Not the cold justice of judges, but the kind that comes when truth finally finds room to breathe. Livia had started her life over from zero, but not with rebellion or anger. She knew that in order to be reborn, it was necessary to stop staring at the past as if there was still something to save there. Her new routine was silent, simple, full of invisible battles that only she knew about. She woke up early, prepared the lunchboxes with care, and delivered each one with a light, genuine smile, even though inside her there was still a field of ruins. In the hardest moments, she remembered Caio's hands intertwined with hers, the nights when he held her after long shifts, the whispered conversations in the dark, and then she forced herself to stop remembering. She knew she could not live in the shadow of something that might never be what it once was. It was during this process of rebuilding that she met Samuel, a calm, reserved nurse, with eyes of someone who had already lost a lot, but still knew how to smile sincerely. He was gentle without forcing closeness, and from the very first time he cared for Livia's grandmother, he made sure to show that he cared, not with words, but with gestures, buying the medicine when she forgot, helping with the walker, cleaning the wounds without hurry, and in doing so, without knowing it, he began to heal Livia's wounds as well. She resisted at first. She thought she would never be able to feel something real for another man, but Samuel asked for nothing. He only offered presence, and little by little, Livia began to let her guard down. Not out of loneliness, but because she realized that there were men who didn't love only when it was convenient for them. The conversations began with small talk. Then came the confidences. He told her about the loss of his sister, about a difficult childhood, about interrupted dreams. She told him about Caio, not with resentment, but with a kind of mature, resigned pain. And Samuel, instead of taking advantage of her fragility, respected every silence, every hesitation, every memory. He was different, profoundly different, and that was frightening. Livia found herself smiling alone after their meetings, and at the same time she scolded herself. I still think about Caio, but time, as always, has its own way of healing. On a cloudy afternoon, as a light rain fell and the smell of wet earth entered through the window, Samuel brought her a homemade cake. They sat on the porch. There was no declaration, no promises, just a comfortable silence. And then he said, "I'm not here to erase anyone. I just wanted to remind you that you can still be loved without having to suffer for it." Those words echoed in Livia more strongly than any scream. They were simple, but they came from an honest place. She didn't answer, but that day, for the first time, she allowed him to rest his head on her shoulder. It was a small gesture, but in that context, it meant the world. It was the first step toward a new love, a love that didn't need glamour, money, or heroism. A possible love, human, alive. Meanwhile, the city they had left behind kept turning. Caio continued in his private mourning. He rebuilt the workshop, regained the client's trust, restored his bond with his father. But deep inside, he knew he was losing Livia. And maybe he deserved that. Maybe that was the fair price for having given in to blackmail. But what he didn't know yet was that life was about to put the two of them face to face once again. And none of the previous choices would matter as much as what they would do from that moment on. The name of Caio, once whispered in street corners as a synonym of effort and simplicity, now echoed through the halls of influence as the man who had refused a fortune for the sake of dignity. The city that had seen him grow up among grease and sweat now watched him walk with his head held high, without Bruna at his side, without a mansion, without a luxury car. The workshop was running again, not like before, but as a symbol of resistance. The old hydraulic lift still failed, the gate groaned when opened, and the coffee was still strained in the same worn cloth, but everything there had a soul. And even though his body still ached from so many sleepless nights, Caio had made a pact with himself. He would never again sell his peace in exchange for security. Invitations for interviews came, so did the praise. They called him the man who resisted temptation, the example of integrity. But those headlines never touched what truly was missing. Livia. Every face that walked into the workshop made his heart beat faster, hoping it was her. Every lunchbox he saw on the street brought a lump to his throat. The smell of freshly cooked food, the patterned apron, even the sound of bicycles made him remember. And remembering was a slow poison. It hurt more than betrayal. It was absence with form, smell, and memory. It was knowing she was alive, but far away, and maybe with someone else. The image of Livia with Samuel began to haunt him. An acquaintance had told him, with a heavy heart, that she was doing well. "She seems happy," they said. Those words destroyed what little pride Caio still had left. Happy, as if he had been just an old chapter, as if he had not been the love of her life. Yet even so, he did not look for her. He knew that love could not be demanded, that regret cannot force a return. He knew that, to deserve her again, he would have to become another man, and not for her, but for himself. At night, lying on the single bed in the small room at the back of the workshop, he stared at the ceiling and relived everything. The first meeting, the first lunchbox, the marriage proposal, the moment he lost her, every mistake, every silence, every yes given out of fear and not by choice. Bruna's money no longer touched him. What remained of that cursed fortune had been used to pay debts, donate to charities, and restart life with the little that was clean. The mansion was sold. The apartment given up. Caio chose to keep only what he could carry in his hands and in his heart: the workshop, the story, and the guilt. Bruna, on the other hand, was disappearing from the news. Her name was no longer relevant, her influence crumbling, her image too tarnished to recover. She left for another country, trying to rebuild her reputation among strangers. But for Caio, her presence was now just a distant echo, a nightmare overcome. A mistake that taught him how much a man can lose when he tries to buy what should only be earned with truth. Amid all of this, Caio began writing letters, not to send, but to organize his heart. Letters to Livia, outpourings, apologies, memories. He kept them in an old box in the last drawer of the cabinet. He did not know if he would ever have the courage to give them to her, but writing was a way of not going mad. And more than that, it was a way of keeping alive the hope that maybe, somewhere down the road, life would give him a second chance. But what he didn't know, what no one knew, was that destiny was already weaving the reunion in silence, because there was someone who cherished one of Livia's lunchboxes more dearly than the food inside. A customer on her new delivery route, a customer who also happened to be a friend of Samuel, and who, on an ordinary afternoon, by accident or coincidence, would let slip a sentence that would change everything. Did you know that the lunchbox lady used to be engaged to Caio from the workshop, and then silence would become noise, and the past a road back? The phrase, spoken innocently by the lunchbox customer, was like a lit match thrown into a barrel of gunpowder. Samuel froze. Until that moment, he knew there had been a Caio in Livia's past, but he never imagined it was the same man whose face had appeared on magazine covers as the ex-fiancée of the lottery heiress. That discovery created a silent dilemma inside him. He didn't want to become just another man fighting for space in the heart of a wounded woman. But now, without Livia knowing, he carried a secret that could change everything. Bruna, the former millionaire, had never wanted Caio back out of love. Her entire game had always been fueled by hatred, and Samuel had discovered that by accident, in the worst possible way. It was a suffocating late afternoon when Samuel left his hospital shift and was called for a home visit in a luxury condominium. The patient was a woman who demanded discretion, frail, nervous, surrounded by piles of legal papers and folders from collapsing finances. Her name, Darlene, Bruna's former personal assistant. It took only a few minutes before, in a feverish delirium, she started saying more than she should. She mentioned that everything was a plan from the very beginning, that Bruna had never accepted being left by Caio years ago, that she used the lottery money as a weapon to take revenge for everything she believed she had lost, that she had gotten close to him again only to break him from the inside out, to watch him crawl, to make Livia feel defeated. Samuel, stunned, listened, unsure whether it was real. But Darlene, even weak, detailed dates, conversations, showed printed emails, messages saved in forgotten files on an old tablet. It was all there. Bruna had planned every single move. The triumphant return, the blackmail, the gifts, the dinners, even the casual meetings with reporters and social columnists. Everything was part of a script carefully crafted to destroy the man who once left her. And she had used the fortune from luck as ammunition for revenge. With his chest burning and his mind racing, Samuel didn't know what to do. Telling Livia the truth would mean giving up any chance he might have with her, but hiding it would be betrayal. So he chose the hardest path, honesty. He called Livia for a conversation and, with tear-filled eyes, told her everything he had heard. He showed her the papers, the recorded audios, and said, "I know I might be digging my own way out of your life, but you need to know, that wasn't love, it was cruelty." Livia listened in silence. Her hands trembled, her heart pounded like a drum. Every word felt like reliving a pain she thought she had already overcome. But there, amid the shock, she also felt something new, relief, the certainty that she had not been replaced out of weakness, but torn away by a cruel, calculated lie. And that, despite Caio's mistakes, what separated them was a wicked plan. The next day, without telling anyone, Livia picked up her recipe notebook, put on her apron, and returned to the neighborhood where it had all begun. She stopped in front of the workshop. She didn't get out. She just watched from afar. She saw Caio, sweaty, under a car, laughing with a customer. He looked tired, but alive, human, broken, yes, but whole in his own way. And for the first time in months, she smiled for real. Bruna, on the other hand, was receiving visits from court officers. The schemes revealed by Darlene triggered deep investigations. Allegations of money laundering, blackmail, and fraud against partner companies began to stain the name she had fought so hard to turn into a symbol of power. Alone in her empty apartment, she stared into the mirror like someone facing ruins, and in the depths of her eyes, there was no regret, only rage at having lost, not love, but control. Caio still did not know the truth that had come to light, but fate was about to put him face to face with it, and this time, no lie would be greater than what still lived between them. Bruna's downfall was not sudden. It was slow, dragged out, and cruel, like a punishment meticulously calculated by life itself. The money she once treated as shield and sword began to leak through the cracks she had chosen to ignore. Bank accounts frozen on suspicion of tax evasion, investors demanding reimbursement, lawsuits filed by old partners who had only been fronts, leaked emails, suspicious contracts, intercepted calls. The The fortune of the former millionaire, built on ego, lies, and a dirty lottery ticket, began to evaporate like ice under the sun. What once were unbeatable figures now turned into bills, liens, freezes, and public humiliation. Bruna's image, once untouchable, became an easy target on social media. News reports exposed her downfall, revealed her missteps, and narrated how she had used her wealth to manipulate people and to destroy lives. The audio from her grandmother, the testimony of her former secretary Darlene, and the financial evidence uncovered by auditors formed a devastating dossier. Bruna was summoned to testify. She had to leave through the back door of the building where she once reigned. And as she walked out, she faced cameras, microphones, and hungry reporters. For the first time, there were no heels, no makeup, no victorious smile, only the expression of someone who finally understood that the world exacts a high price from those who pretend to be bigger than the truth. While she sank, Caio's world began to rise, but not with luxury, through redemption. The workshop prospered slowly, with clients returning out of trust. His name, once stained by gossip, was cleaned with sweat. And even without knowing about Bruna's collapse, Caio could feel, in the air, in the atmosphere, in the newfound lightness in his chest, that something had changed. At night, he still wrote letters to Livia, but now, some of them carried smiles between the lines. And even if they were never sent, they were sincere confessions from a man who had learned the cost of lies and the value of regret. On the other side, Livia followed everything in silence. She read the news, watched the videos, listened to the audios, and with each new revelation, the knot in her chest loosened. She did not wish harm to anyone, nor did she celebrate another's ruin, but it was impossible not to feel a quiet justice being done, not out of vengeance, but balance. And when she learned that the workshop was standing again, and that Caio had turned down easy contracts offered by curious businessmen, she knew he had changed. One day, while delivering an extra order of lunchboxes to a new client, she received a plain cardboard box, no sender, no name. Inside, a bundle of letters, all in the handwriting she knew by heart. Caio's handwriting, the smell of the workshop, the words never spoken. They were torn confessions, sincere apologies, requests for forgiveness that did not beg for her return, only for acknowledgement. And in every sentence, a piece of his soul. He spoke of love, but he asked for nothing in return. He spoke of pain, but never played the victim. He spoke of longing, but accepted the possibility of never touching her again. Livia cried, for hours, not for the memories, but for what was being renewed inside her. The letters said more than any speech. They said that Caio was finally man enough not to try to win her back with promises, but with truth. She did not answer immediately. She kept them. She read and reread them. She needed to be sure that her heart would not once again be placed in hands that falter. But something was already decided. She would see him again, and this time they would both be clean. Meanwhile, Bruna was legally ordered to return part of the assets acquired through fraud. She lost the penthouse, the cars, the designer furniture, even her latest generation phone. All she had left was a cheap hotel room, some branded clothes, and the mirror, a cruel mirror, now showing not just financial bankruptcy, but the moral bankruptcy of someone who used love as a weapon. And there, alone, forgotten, despised, she understood that the love she tried to destroy was never hers, and never would be. Caio spent days staring at the entrance of the neighborhood, as if waiting for a miracle. Every bicycle that crossed the street made his heart beat faster. Every woman with her hair tied up, in simple clothes, walking with that firm, determined step, lit up a desperate hope inside him. Could it be her? But it never was. Life moved on around him. Cars honked, the workshop gained new clients, his elderly father was slowly recovering, but Caio's chest remained full of empty spaces. The letters had been sent. Livia's silence, however, persisted. A silence that spoke louder than words to a man who had learned how to listen. Restless, he decided to go to her. He grabbed his worn-out backpack, put on a clean cotton shirt, tied his worn sneakers and left. He didn't bring flowers, nor gifts, nor promises. He brought only himself, a man stripped of vanity, full of mistakes, but full of will to start over. When he reached the neighboring city, he took a deep breath, asked for directions to the cousin's house where she was staying, and found it easily. It was a simple house with a tidy garden, a clothesline full of colorful clothes, and the smell of food in the air. His heart nearly burst out of his chest. He knocked on the door. Once, twice, 3 times. It was Samuel who opened it, the nurse, gentle, calm, but this time there was a shadow of caution in his eyes. The two stared at each other in silence for what felt like eternal seconds, like 2 soldiers on opposite sides of a war neither wanted to fight. Caio went straight to the point. "I didn't come to cause problems. I just need to talk to her. If she doesn't want to see me, I'll leave." Samuel hesitated, but he was not a dishonest man. He simply said, "She's out, delivering lunchboxes, but I think she'll want to see you. Wait in the garden. I'll tell her." Caio nodded. He sat on a wooden bench painted blue and waited. His hands were sweating, his mind spinning. What if she didn't want to see him? What if there was someone else? What if... But his thoughts were interrupted by the firm steps he knew so well. Livia appeared around the corner, holding a thermal bag, her hair tied up with the same old clip as always. When she saw him, she stopped. Time froze. She didn't say anything. Neither did he. But their eyes said everything. She walked toward him slowly. Her body was tense, her breathing uneven. She stopped just 1 step away from him. Then Caio, with a trembling voice, said, "I know it might be too late. I know I hurt you, but I'm here because I don't want our story to end on that sidewalk." Livia took a deep breath, her eyes filled with tears. She fought against the tears, against the memories, against the heart that still beat for him even when her body told her not to. And then, finally she answered, "It would be too late if you hadn't changed." And in that moment, the ground between them ceased to be distance. Livia extended her hand, not like before, not with blind surrender, but with real hope. He held it, gripped it tightly, and there, in that touch, everything that had been shattered found its first thread of stitching. But reconciliation, even when it begins, must be built. She invited him inside. They sat. They talked for hours. He told her everything about the collapse, the letters, the workshop, and the decision to live clean. She listened, asked, cried, smiled, and in the end, she said, "I don't know if I'll be able to love you like before, but I know there's still love here, and if you're willing to make it work, then so am I." Caio didn't answer with words. He just stood up, walked toward her, and hugged her like someone coming home after a war. And for the first time in a very long time, the two of them breathed in relief, not because the pain was over, but because something new had finally begun. Rebuilding love is harder than falling in love, because love, in the beginning, is a dive, but forgiveness is work. And that was exactly what Livia and Caio decided to do. Work. Not in silence, not with empty promises, but with concrete gestures, with listening, with commitment, and with the courage to face the ruins that had been left between them. Forgiveness, once seen as something impossible, began to appear not as an isolated event, but as a daily process. Caio moved into a small rented room close to Livia's new house. He didn't insist on sharing a roof. He preferred to show, day after day, that he was there out of love, not convenience. That he didn't want to go back to what they had been. He wanted to build what they had never been before. He went with her on deliveries, not as a partner, but as a helper. He carried the heavy bags, wiped off dirty lids, smiled at the customers, and said, "Enjoy your meal," as if that world was all he ever wanted. And maybe it was, because by her side, even the simplest routine became colorful. At night, they sat on the sidewalk, shared coffee with bread, and remembered the old versions of themselves. They laughed about their fights, their slang, the tricks they used to save on gas, but they also cried. Caio was no longer afraid to show his fragility, and Livia was no longer ashamed to admit that she was still afraid to trust. But forgiveness, that slow miracle, was happening there, in the everyday moments, in the gentle touch, in the comfortable silences. The days passed, and the signs of transformation became undeniable. Caio, once ruled by pride and impulses, was now a man who listened more than he spoke, who stopped to fix her grandmother's bedsheet, who washed the dishes without being asked, who refused compliments, because he understood that repentance is not redeemed with medals, but with constancy. Livia, in turn, lowered her defenses. She began inviting him for lunch, letting him cook, laughing at his bad jokes. And before she realized it, she was saying we again, like someone who understands that love is not about never falling, but about who holds your hand after the fall. Then something unexpected happened. Caio's father, now fully recovered, decided to sell part of the workshop and opened a small auto parts business with his son. He wanted to start something new, away from the painful memories, and he invited Livia to join as a partner. She was hesitant at first, but accepted. She knew that this marked not just a new professional chapter, but a new life. The business grew, the clientele doubled, and the family's name once again became a synonym for honesty. Meanwhile, Bruna's story became nothing more than a footnote in the newspapers. Without money, without allies, without power, she disappeared from the public eye. Some said she went to the countryside to take care of her grandmother. Others said she left the country in search of anonymity. Caio never wanted to know, not out of contempt, but because he had finally learned to leave the past where it belongs, in the past. And then, on a Saturday afternoon, after another round of lunchbox deliveries, Caio stopped in front of Livia, held her hands, and said, "I don't want to be the man who loses you anymore. I want to be the man who stays." She didn't answer with words. She just hugged him, strongly, completely, with tears in her eyes and relief in her chest. There in that hug was everything that life had tried to destroy, but couldn't. Forgiveness had won, not as a heroic gesture, but as a daily decision. And there, with no audience, no glamour, no spectacle, only true love, they started over. Time passed without hurry, as it should when love matures after the storm. Months turned into seasons, and with each change in the weather, Caio and Livia wrote a new chapter of life together. There was no luxury, there was no ostentation, but there was something that many never managed to achieve: peace. The workshop was doing well, the new auto parts business was thriving, and Livia's small homemade restaurant, born from the lunchboxes, was starting to gain fame. Customers traveled from far away to taste her feijoada, her cakes with the taste of childhood, her lovingly brewed coffee. Her name became a brand, but more than that, it became a synonym for starting over. It was on an afternoon of clear skies and warm breeze that everything changed. Caio had left early, saying he needed to solve a problem with suppliers, but in truth, he was planning something with the help of his father, Samuel, who had become a sincere friend, and even some old neighbors. When Livia arrived at the restaurant, she found everything dark. She thought it was a power outage, but as soon as she pushed the door open, candles lit up, soft music filled the air, and a path of rose petals led to the back of the dining room. There, under warm lights, in a space decorated with simple charm, surrounded by the few people who truly mattered, was Caio, wearing the blue shirt she loved, his hair neatly combed, and a smile that carried in his eyes all the vulnerability of someone who loves without reservations. He was holding a small box with no luxury, no diamond ring, but with something that carried more value than any jewel: a pair of silver wedding bands, made from the same material he used in the workshop. Simple, rustic, real. You forgave me, gave me back my life, and taught me what true love is. And now, I don't ever want to lose you again. Marry me, Livia, not to start all over, but to continue what we never finished. Livia, already crying before he finished the question, didn't answer with words. She just knelt with him, placed her hand over his chest, and nodded with a long kiss. The restaurant, which had so many times been a stage for silent pain, now echoed with applause, laughter, and promises. The two were married right there, without a registry office, without a priest, without ceremony. Just love. A love that resisted poverty, humiliation, lies, abandonment. A love that had been torn apart and shattered and yet survived. After the yes kiss, Caio lifted Livia into his arms as if carrying his own heart. And as they slowly turned to the sound of a simple guitar, the candlelight flickered like silent witnesses to a modern miracle. There were no famous guests, no professional photographer, but there was truth. There was faith. There were two survivors who understood, after everything, that the greatest wealth in life is to love and to be loved, even after making mistakes. Bruna was never seen again. Some say she reunited with her grandmother and now lives quietly taking care of her. Others say she left in search of herself, far from the country. It no longer mattered. Her story, though part of the past, no longer defined the present. What mattered now was what was growing between Caio and Livia. A simple life, built with hands stained from work, but with hearts washed clean of pain. And so this story ends, not with a perfect ending, but with a true ending. Because love, when it is real, doesn't need to be ideal. It only needs to be honest and to endure.